What kind of security technologies do we actually need in a modern society? Before examining and many times dismissing some specific countermeasures against the threats that we've already talked about, let's stop to think about the security needs. So in the computerized, international, interconnected, interdependent world, what kind of security should we expect? Specifically, we're going to talk about privacy, multi-level security, anonymity, authentication, integrity, and audits. First, let's discuss privacy. People often have a complicated relationship with privacy. We want some privacy, but when asked to pay for it, we often don't want to. Businesses also have a complicated relationship with it. They want it, they know the importance of it, they are sometimes willing to pay for it with locks or alarms, firewalls, corporate security policies. But when push comes to shove and work needs to get done, security might be the first thing that gets thrown out of the window. Governments deal better with privacy. They know the importance of not having their military secrets in the hands of the enemies. They know they need it, they know it is costly, and sometimes they get the key details wrong. But governments do have the general idea of how to implement privacy correct. Privacy is a difficult topic to discuss because almost no one realizes exactly how important it is in our lives. It's supposed to be a constitutional right or a human right, but, well, sometimes in certain situations, governments or companies or even private people are willing to discard privacy. Democracy is built upon the notion of privacy. We can't have secret ballots without them. Businesses can't function without at least some notion of privacy. We need privacy within companies that have multiple individuals who need to know some proprietary information in order to do business effectively. And of course, we have individual people who want to be secure in our conversations, in the papers and the homes. Most countries have laws protecting individual privacy. For example, in the European Union, the Data Protection Act came to be in 1998, and 20 years later we had the General Data Protection Regulation. Organizations that collect personal data are also prohibited from the collection, use, and dissemination of personal information without the consent of the person. Organizations also have the duty to tell individuals about the reason for the information being collected, to provide access and correct inaccurate information, and to keep that information secure from access by unauthorized people. Individuals also have a right to see their own personal data. They have the right to have inaccuracies corrected. They have the right to know what data is being collected for, and they have the right to be sure that their data isn't being sold for other purposes. There's also the right to opt out of data collection and the right to be forgotten after data collection is no longer necessary. For businesses, privacy generally does not need to be a long-term thing. Trade secrets, something like the formula for Coca-Cola, for example, well, that's the exception. Customer databases might need to remain confidential for a few years, but again, this is not a long-term thing. Product development data only lasts for a few years. Information about general financial health, business negotiations, tactical maneuvers, well, these have a lifespan of some weeks or some months. That's because information diffuses very rapidly. Last week's business secrets have been supplanted by this week's new business secrets. This week's business secrets are, in fact, next week's Wall Street Journal headlines. Governments need short-term privacy as well. Often the interests of one country run counter to the interests of another country, and governments need to keep certain pieces of information secret from that other country. Unfortunately, countries are a lot bigger than companies. Let's say it's impossible to tell everyone in the United States a secret without leaking it to the government of China. Therefore, if the United States wants to keep a secret from the Chinese, it has to keep it a secret from almost all Americans as well. The secrets are usually of a military nature. Strategy and tactics, weapons capabilities, design and procurement, troop strengths, movements, military research and development. Military secrets often broaden into state secrets, like negotiating positions on treaties and those sort of things. And they often overlap into corporate secrets as well. That would be in cases of military contracts, bargaining positions, import and export dealings, and so on. The exceptions to this short-term privacy need are embarrassments, personal, political, or business embarrassments. Governments don't want their political embarrassments leaking into the press, and people don't want their personal pasts made public. Militaries have a lot of information that needs to be kept secret, but some pieces of information are more secret than others. The locations of Navy ships might be of moderate interest to the enemy, but the launch codes for the missiles on those ships are much more important. The number of bedrolls in the supply chain is probably not very interesting, but the number of rifles or other weapons is of greater interest. To deal with this kind of a thing, militaries have invented multiple levels of security classifications. In the US military, data is either unclassified, confidential, secret, or top secret. Rules govern what kind of data falls into what classification, and different classifications have different rules for storage, dissemination, and so on. For example, different strength safes are required for different classifications of data. Top secret data might only be stored in certain guarded windowless rooms without photocopiers and might need to be signed out. People working with this data need security clearances to commensurate with the highest classification of information that they are working with. Someone with a secret clearance, for instance, can see information that is unclassified, confidential, and secret. Someone with a confidential clearance can only see unclassified and confidential data. Of course, clearance is not a guarantee of trustworthiness. The CIA's head Russian counterintelligence officer, Aldrich Ames, had a top secret security clearance, but he was also a Russian spy. Data at the top secret level or above is sometimes divided by topic or compartment. Compartments have associated keywords. Something like talent or keyhole, for example, are the keywords that are associated with KH-11 spy satellites. Umbra applies to communications intelligence and RUF to imagery intelligence. These compartments are topical access barriers. Someone who has a top secret clearance with an additional keyhole clearance, or sometimes called a keyhole ticket, can see keyhole related intelligence data, but is not authorized to see top secret COBRA data. These compartments are a formal codification of the need to know idea. So just because someone has a certain level of clearance doesn't mean that they automatically get to see every piece of data at that clearance level. The idea is that people only see the data that they need to see in order to do their jobs. There are also other designations that modify these classifications, something like no foreign nationals, warning notice, intelligence sources and methods, or limited dissemination. Other countries have similar rules. The UK, for instance, has one additional classification level, restricted, which falls between unclassified and confidential. The US has something similar for official use only, which basically means It's not really classified, but don't tell anyone anyway. 2 points are important about multi-level security. First, this kind of a thing is much easier to implement on paper than it is to implement on a computer. Some of the multi-level security systems have been built and used, but none of them have ever worked on a large scale. Second, this kind of a thing is largely irrelevant outside of the military setting. Corporate secrets don't work this way, and neither do individual secrets. Security in the real world doesn't fit into neat hierarchical boxes, unfortunately.